This is Thrive Perspectives, an ever-growing discussion about the issues and ideas that shape our lives, with your guide, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Welcome to Thrive Perspectives. I'm Stu, your host, and today we're exploring a story hidden in plain sight, the way the Christian church has shaped modern Western culture itself. Long before trust was placed in governments, markets or systems, it was formed through the life of the church. A gospel vision of shared responsibility and care gave rise to schools, hospitals and networks of support, places where people learned to trust that they were not alone, that the vulnerable mattered, and that community carried responsibility together. That legacy still underpins Western society, even as our culture has shifted towards individualism and self-reliance. So what happens when a world built on communal trust begins to forget the source that formed it? Today, Connell and Mad explore how the church shaped our instincts of trust and responsibility, and why recovering a gospel-shaped vision of community matters now more than ever.
Well, I've got to admit, Matt, I feel a little bit out of my depth on that.
No, you're not. You're ready for it, so you can do it.
When you first proposed the topic, you kind of described it as how the gospel has influenced
our whole way of thinking.
Cultural psychology.
Yeah, our cultural psychology, yeah.
Yeah.
So often in these episodes, I respond to things that I'm reading. I mean, I try to stay across, what people are saying. I read fairly widely, and obviously I'm incorporating that in my teaching at Melbourne School of Theology, teaching philosophy and worldview and, interpreting our culture. And so I really try and stay across things that are coming out. I also love it. It's like, because I'm fascinated with ideas and what people are thinking and why they're thinking those things. But I do try to keep tabs on, I guess, what are the trends within our culture. Now, today's episode is responding to a book called The Weirdest People in the World. It's a book by Harvard University professor Joseph Henrich. And the subtitle of the book is How the West Became Psychologically Peculiar and Particularly Prosperous. And Joseph Henrich is not a Christian. He's in some ways, I sense underlying sort of criticism. But this is a kind of evolutionary psychology in a way, like talking about how our culture evolved and how we evolved psychologically over the last, roughly 1,500 years, according to him. Yeah.
And of course, being not a Christian is actually,
in
terms of what he's saying, it's kind of like...
we're not pumping up our own tires here.
It's not just coming from a Christian bias. Yeah. And there are plenty of other non-Christian sort of scholars that feeding into this as well. It carries extra weight, I think.
Yeah, and this is why I find it interesting, because it's not just... but this actually did remind me of something really important. We'll get to that towards the end of the episode. But this book sort of sits in the same sort of stream. There's a number of books we've talked about, Connell. Like we've talked about, one of my favourites is Larry Seedentop's, the Oxford historian and philosopher's book, Inventing Individualism. Yep. And that is a book that really traces our whole modern way of life or our modern systems of liberal democracies back to this idea without the concept of the individual as it was essentially invented in the early church period. I mean, it's kind of there in the Old Testament, but Seedentop particularly goes back to the teachings of Paul and this idea of, the importance of the individual's response to God. So the individual is no longer a cog in a big cultural machine. Yeah. The individual is an integrity to the individual because God addresses each individual and wants each individual to enter equally into a relationship with him. Now, Seedentop talks about how absolutely countercultural that was and how our whole concept of ourselves as individuals with an individual conscience. I mean, why does that even matter? Because in the ancient world, it doesn't matter what your conscience is. You're just a cog in a bigger societal machine, and you've got to offer the sacrifices and do your bit. It doesn't matter if it comes from the heart or not. It's just like you've got to do your bit, right? You've got to play your role in the caste system, and that's it.
the emphasis there is that those ancient cultures, and we're not, even when we say ancient, we're not going back that long ago, are we? The model of society was more built around the idea of having a kind of like an authority at the top of a family group and having a kind of a kin, what they call sort of
kin-based societies.
Kin-based society, where that sounds good, like we care for our kin, but it was that was the limits of how much we tended to care. We didn't care too much about strangers or
we'll get to that. Now, I mean, the interesting thing about this, and I think what's interesting about this particular book is that this is from a psychological point of view. So whereas Siedentop is looking at the origins, a little bit more the origins of ideas. And in a way, I think Siedentop's book is a bit of a supplement to this because he starts in the early Middle Ages. Joseph Henrich starts in the early Middle Ages. But essentially what he's saying is that the way that we think, even by present standards, now you mentioned the ancient world, okay, but actually he's saying even by present standards, we are now even still the weirdest people in the world because people don't think in these same terms. Now, a lot of that's spilt over, but what he's saying is that any society that has roots in former Christian companies that were formerly governed by the church. Now, we can be critical of that and everything, but and about all of the problems associated with that, but there are some very interesting byproducts of that we're going to talk about today. The foremost being, as you just said, basically the dissolution of the kin-based order. Now, let me explain this a little bit. So ancient societies were always built around family loyalty. Family loyalty was the highest of all values, pretty much. Your loyalty, loyalty to your family. And this created kin-based societies. And essentially this turned into castes as well because your kinship group is your clan, and clans grew into tribes, okay? And there were certain tribes or clans that were more successful than others that ruled over other clans, so that when they got together, it formed a bit of a ladder, where the clan that's third from the top, or where the clan that's at the top, or where and it was all based on family systems. And you see this reflected even in Scripture, right? And I think that's fine in the sense that God is still working with that. There was always going to be this moment where that was going to break down, and certainly Jesus explicitly breaks that down at that moment when someone comes to him and says, "Your mother and your brothers are here." And Jesus said, "Who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters? Everyone who listens to my word, everyone who follows me is my kin," essentially. So that's a very explicit moment where Jesus is pointing to the fact that he has come to create a movement that goes beyond kinship, that goes beyond tribes. And of course, most importantly, and this is where, you see this in the teaching of Jesus, but most explicitly in Paul, it crosses over. There's no more Jew and Gentile in the sense that this is going to become an international family of God. Not just a family of God based on your genealogy.
So I think this is an important thing to understand because that is the ancient world in which the scriptures.
Well, it's not just the ancient world; it's actually still many societies are still based on that to this day. And this is the interesting thing. So to give you an example, and basically what I was going to say is that it was the church that broke down those kinship networks, and that's the core of that's where he starts. He talks about the marriage laws of the medieval church and how they forbade cousin marriage and even second cousin marriage, and part of this was breaking down these kinship systems. Now, that's only possible, and this is where I think there's a shortfall in Henrich's book, and this is where I think Larry Siedentop's book, Inventing the Individual, is a good supplement, because without this sense of the kinship of all human beings, without this sense of equality, the integrity of the individual, and the general sense of the family, a family of God that transcends all tribal boundaries, that's what made these laws even possible.
Because you couldn't go and break down those clans
without something else.
Where do they belong?
And so essentially, what the church did is created the idea of a family of humankind. This idea that as human beings we're all equal, and pretty much that led to a new way of relating to people, is that you honor someone not because they're related to you. I mean, this is so important, right?
Yeah.
You honor someone not because they're related to you, but because they're a sacred child of God. And in fact, to prefer someone or to show favoritism to someone just because you're related to them, that becomes fundamentally unjust, right? Now, again, this is the point. In our society, Henrik is saying, we take that for granted. Oh, that's nepotism, right? If someone in a position of authority gives their family all the positions of power, we look at that and we think that's unjust, that's nepotism. However, that actually is normal. And this is interesting, actually, even in countries, because one of the things that Henrik points out is this takes quite a long time. This wasn't achieved in one generation. The breaking down of those kinship structures took generations for this to change the psychology of essentially the West.
Is this why, though, too, we see things move very slowly? Jesus introduced ideas or seeds that would take generations.
And he said as much, didn't he?
Because you can't just sort of go, right, as from tomorrow, there are no...
We're going to think differently.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you might at a purely intellectual level, I guess this goes back to our last episode, doesn't it? But for beliefs, deeply held beliefs, for our psychology to actually change fundamentally, that takes a while. And certainly for your cultural psychology, for there to be a change in a broad cultural psychology. And that's an interesting concept. We'll talk about that a little bit more because it's interesting how the Christian church, and this is, I think, something that I realized through reading this book, is the way in which the gospel and the progress of the gospel and the Christian church changes not only the people that become Christians, but has actually changed the cultural psychology of the context that it has existed within. Yeah. So to just refer to this idea of it happening slowly. So have become more and more familiar with the Kenyan context because of a partnership that our church has, and I've been there and talked politics with people over there, and just to find out how things work, and I've read a bit of Kenyan history as well, just to get my head around that. And one of the things that they have not been able to move beyond is a tribal way of this kinship, tribal way of thinking, even though it is a Christian country. I mean, the proportion of Christians in their country is much higher than ours, of professing Christians at least. Yes. But it's quite a shallow spread. Probably the tribal way of thinking still dominates.
But even within the Christian communities, do you see some movement?
Yeah. There's movement.
It's
That's
just
right.
They're lagging behind.
Yeah, it'll take generations to change the systems. Now, I mean, talking about the system, one of the things that's just so difficult in African context, and there's a book called Why Africa is Poor, and it also addresses some of the reasons behind. I mean, basically puts it down to the corruption of those in authority. That's no surprise in a way, but he is actually also addressing why, as well. And actually, one of the reasons why, and this is in fact in Kenya at the moment, has been in the past, when someone comes to authority, straight away their highest loyalty is not to Kenya, but it's to their family and to their tribal group. Yeah. And everyone knows this. It's almost expected, right? So now, if I'm in authority, I have an obligation to enrich my family and my tribe, right? That becomes the highest obligation. Yeah. And what we're seeing in these countries is the limitations of that way of thinking, right? It does not allow for progress. And this is Henrik's point, right? Yeah. When you think that way, and we'll go into a little bit more of the details of why, like what that actually prevents. Mm. Now, of course, countries like Kenya have imported a lot of ideas, but it takes a while for these things to really settle and essentially replace these patrimonial loyalties it's like that have been there for generations and generations.
Turning a massive ship around in the ocean.
It is,
a completely different direction. And even in Kenya, as you get a lot of new Christians coming into the church, they're coming in with all the baggage of expecting things to work with a kin-based model. And so this just can't change overnight. So,
no, that's right. Yeah.
But the thing is, I guess when you look at it, it's just, it does work though. Like the Christian message permeates all the way through history, that it does gradually get us to where God wants us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does it undermines but doesn't completely eradicate these things. I mean, another example, and this is not one that's treated so much here, but the law of Moses is designed to fundamentally undermine caste systems, which were a big part of the ancient world. Things like the year of Jubilee and the redistribution of property every 49 years, and the cancellation of debts, and all of these different laws about limiting bonded labour so it doesn't become slavery the way that we think about it, or protecting escaped slaves. All of these sorts of things were meant to basically undermine the caste systems. Now, have we got rid of that fully? It's there in our human nature. You know, we have a natural propensity to prefer our friends, a natural propensity to patrimonialism. We have a natural propensity towards building caste systems. And yet, at a higher level, we all carry somewhat in our conscience this sense that, okay, if I'm in a position of power and I prefer my son to someone else, I sort of know deep down, you know what I mean? I know that I'm not doing something quite right. Whereas in a kin-based society, if you didn't do that, you would feel that you're not honouring family loyalty.
Yeah, so that overrides.
And that would override everything.
I don't know whether it was Seedentop or Henrik. They talked about one of the changes there is also this whole idea of like shame and guilt, so that in the kin-based model, you feel shame, which is put on you by the community.
Yeah.
But if you didn't behave and do the things that the community expected of you, you feel a sense of shame. But as the transitions moved away from that and become more individual focused, it's become more about guilt. In other words,
and Henrik would say that the church invented guilt, but it's not invented guilt. It's essentially allowed for that to be experienced by the individual, because it's not, the emphasis is on the individual before God and not the person as a cog in a societal structure.
With guilt, it was like an internal sense of doing what's right, even if nobody's watching.
Yeah.
Like you have an internal moral compass. You kind of center on that. It's not so much about trying to live according to the standards of your immediate sort of clan, but you have your own sense of morality that you use that to navigate yourself through life and make choices that aren't necessarily even for your benefit, because
that's right.
The emergence.
That's right. And he said that's a peculiar thing. Why don't we just dig a little bit into the book? By the way, WEIRD is an acronym. WEIRD. So it stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich and Democratic.
So that does mean aligned.
We are those
Western.
things.
We are in the Western.
That's right. So
as opposed to, which is actually, I guess it's a smaller part, like these weird societies, the Western societies would you say they're a smaller part of the global community? Like most are not like this?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that's why he's saying that the way that we think is not normal. In fact, a lot of the book's probably what makes it slightly tiresome read, because he goes through and summarizes reams and reams of research and all of these published research that's been done, where they've, done basically kind of social experiments that highlight the fact that people respond differently to strangers. All sorts of different tests, but certainly responding differently to strangers. I mean, if I'm in a kin-based society, I have no loyalty towards you as a stranger, and I don't really feel bad if I treat you badly for the sake of me and my family. In fact, I actually feel like I'm being loyal to my family, but I have no concern about you. Whereas in post-Christian societies, I feel conscience-stricken about the way that I've been treated you, whether or not I'm a Christian or not. Like this is the influence.
Yeah.
I've heard it said before, not just by Christian writers, that the church in some sense became the conscience of the West. When we talk about the West, I'm talking about just some historical facts here. That the Christian church had probably its biggest impact and had the growth space in the former areas of the Roman Empire. Because of Islam in the East and in North Africa, it sort of was a bit of a blocker. And of course, the rest of the world, we didn't really have much contact beyond that. So we had, something like 1,000 years in which Christian activity was concentrated in the area that we now know as Western and sort of Eastern, perhaps Northern Europe, including Western Russia, perhaps.
So Heinrich's book is focused on this whole idea of weird societies, not weird as they're just weird, but the acronym. Well, it's the societies that have.
Well, he's playing on that, isn't he? Yeah, because he's saying, we think we're normal, but he's saying we're not, and he's actually not necessarily even saying it's. Well, he's saying it's what's led to our prosperity, but he's not always saying it's necessarily good. I mean, he's been quite objective about this. He has no interest in promoting Christianity in this book at all.
Yeah, but he's identifying. In the Western democratic countries tend to be educated, industrialized, rich. That's in terms of that acronym. Yeah. And in terms of those societies, these weird societies, as a result, the psychology of a weird society is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
Those are non-weird.
So let's talk about the ways in which it's different. So the key weird psychological traits that he addresses is first of all individualism, and this is of course one that this is the focus of Larry Siedentop's book. Weird individuals focus on, and you understand whenever I say the word weird, in my notes I'm reading and it's in capitals, right? It's an acronym. Okay, it's an acronym. Yes. So weird individuals tend to focus heavily on personal attributes, personal choices, and importantly, Connell, internal motivations, right? Yep. That's important for us. And so they're less conformist and more oriented towards self-definition. The other characteristic is impersonal pro-sociality. So weird people tend to trust strangers more. Right? Now that's enormously important for our society. Our society only works because we can relate to people who are not just our kin group. I mean, and I'll talk about in a moment how that is so fundamental. So we trust strangers more. We rely on universal rules. Okay, it's not just one rule for another and one rule for me. There's more. We generalize more. We think it's general ideas more, universal laws more, things that apply to all human beings. Yep. And so therefore we're actually, the third thing is that we're more prone to analytical thinking as well. And analytical thought, they actually point out, is quite a peculiar feature of weird societies. So weird minds tend to abstract, categorize, and think in terms of general properties, whereas non-weird populations tend to think more contextually and more relationally. Yep. Now, there can be good things about that too. Yep. We're being objective because I think there are some things that can be lost as well. Remember, there was a fall and there's a falling still. I guess as we become more technological, there's also the empowerment of negative trajectories as well. I mean, this is another, let's not be simplistic about this. So those are the key aspects. And basically what he takes this back to is this essentially a sort of cultural revolution that happened between the 4th and the 12th centuries when the church banned cousin marriage, polygamy as well. Polygamy is an important part of kin-based societies, creates essentially big clans created through a patriarch who has lots and lots of kids with various wives. And
so, Bob, before there were a lot of sort of intermarrying, at least within their larger kind of clan or family groups. Once you sort of don't allow that and you ban it, now people are forced to look outside of those groups. And then that sort of then forces to look out beyond our clan. And it's legitimate. It's legitimized now because the main thing is that you marry someone that is a brother or sister in Christ. And so that therefore that goes beyond tribal. You can imagine in Western Europe, you've got the whole of as long as they're a Christian, then it opens it. So essentially it's funny because it has a sort of Tower of Babel effect, as in the scattering of the Tower of Babel. At the Tower of Babel, essentially it's God's response to human beings being bonded together in the wrong way, right? And so they're scattered because the plan is that God is going to bring them together in the right way. And so you see, in a sense, the church has this effect. It sort of breaks up these kin-based societies. Now, so essentially it's breaking the castes that were built on that. So these upper sort of castes that are controlling societies, and by essentially breaking those, allowing for social mobility as well, that marrying outside of your
tribe or / caste, as it often was, once you start breaking that down, you get social mobility and things start to move and the whole thing fragments.
Well, it's a lot harder to control it. There's often a male leader at the top that kind of controlled the clan, and it had hierarchy from the top down. And so by forcing people to go outside of that to marry and then have children, that would have really messed all of that up, because now you're breaking their chain of authority, because now you've got families sort of blending together who are coming from different clans, and wealth transfers and so on that happens.
It has such a, it's so disruptive. It's hard to overstate how disruptive this actually was. I mean, so the emphasis on monogamy essentially creates more nuclear, smaller families, right? And by the way, there's also consent is required. So you can't just have marriages out of business. This tribal chief marries off his daughter to this tribe. No. The church ensured that, but has she consent? We're not going to marry. We can be very critical of the power that the church had at one particular point. Because it had the power to marry, like to get married, marriage became a sacrament of the church. I mean, again, there's a theological thing, whether it should be regarded as a sacrament or whatever is debatable. But essentially the church took responsibility for marriage. So the church said, we're not going to marry someone who doesn't give their consent. And so straight away, as you say, you're breaking down these, marriages. The interesting thing is a lot of this stuff still happened in the upper classes of society. A lot of this...
Well, you still see it in the royal.
You still see it. You know what I mean? And
families.
Well, yes, we've seen it, the last couple of 100 years, still, how inbred all the royal families were. You see even in the early 20th century, they're all very inbred.
But you see how that changes it. Even now, if you look at the UK monarchy and they marry a commoner, it does confuse things a little bit because they're not, from that kind of level of society.
Yeah, and a couple of generations ago, I mean, it was the normal thing for these royal families to marry each other. So in a sense, that's a bit of a taste. What happened there is essentially what was happening everywhere. That's now broken open. And so these policies basically dismantle these clan structures, right? And it fosters a completely different society in which people form relationships not through kin association, but through voluntary association. So think about what this enables. This enables guilds. If you were a shoemaker, that's your family as a family of shoemakers. I mean, this is where you get the surnames associated with crafts, right? And if your son happened to just not like shoemakers, no choice, mate. Whether he was even good at it or not, right? And you see this, don't you? Even in the Old Testament, right? There were family guilds of musicians. The sons of Korah were a guild of Levitical musicians, right? Now, if your son decides he doesn't like music or he's not good at it, it's too bad, mate. This is what we do, right? Yes. So imagine the difference when you can actually choose your occupation based on your proficiencies, based on what you're most natural. And so what you do is that you form a guild, and a guild is a voluntary association.
Right.
It's not a tribal thing.
Yeah.
It's a grouping of people who do that particular activity.
And it keeps changing because now as individuals can choose to belong. It's not a birthright thing. It's kind of like it's a choice. It's your individual choice to belong to that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is essentially universities is another. Universities could not have existed in kin-based societies because you're essentially, to go to university, you're leaving home. Your tutor, your lecturer, he essentially takes the place of the flow of what would otherwise have just been inherited wisdom, inherited knowledge that were passed down through the patriarchs of the family. So basically to go to university, you're coming out under that, potentially adopting ideas that your family might disagree with, which you would automatically always believe what your family believed.
Yes.
Whereas, and this is again Siedentop's point, the most important thing for Christianity was there had to be a choice. You could never just become a Christian just by automatically adopting your family faith. There has to be an individual decision.
Like with anything to do with knowledge and believing and having certain belief systems, as soon as you step outside of the clan, they're all going to get challenged because you're going to come up against people that have got others. And even that idea of knowledge with the universities, it's almost like the knowledge then starts to become like it's owned by the collective, like it's not the knowledge of the clan, but it's like the overarching collection of
what it leads to,
people.
That's a good point, because essentially what it leads to is what Henrik refers to as a kind of communal brain. And this is one of the big aspects of these Western societies that wasn't there before, is this idea of, as you say, of shared knowledge. We have this shared knowledge and we build it together. So this idea of a broad society where we're building knowledge together and we're cooperating with each other, not keeping it to ourselves, but we're sharing it across society and broadly. As he says, this is not possible in these previous kin-based societies. So this idea of the development of knowledge that we've seen in Western societies is only possible in the wake of these church reforms.
As a byproduct of that, led to kind of an explosion of knowledge and development of skills and ideas started to emerge from these societies, which is one of those kind of characteristics.
That's right. So then comes the Reformation, and the Reformation accelerates this, like massively accelerates this, because there's still within the Catholic Church. I mean, the funny thing is, it's human nature, isn't it? Is that the Catholic Church itself was starting to become a bit of a caste system. Yeah. Yes, it was introducing a lot of these ideas, but essentially what Protestantism did is it stripped back to all of these fundamental ideas, and it accelerated this idea of the individual. It put extra emphasis. I mean, it was there, but it did get a bit lost in the Catholic system, was starting to get a bit lost. But Protestantism essentially puts all the emphasis, it's this idea of the priesthood of all believers, and that everyone needs to make their decision before God. In the evangelical movement that came out of this in like the Great Awakening in the 18th century and so forth, again accelerates these ideas of the individual before God, and this idea that the individual being born again and being in a relationship with God.
Individual accountability.
And this is how essentially it's through the Protestant movement that's this idea of the individual conscience, again is accelerated. One of the things, of course, because each individual needs to relate to God for themselves and make the decision for themselves, the Protestant movement puts lots and lots of emphasis on literacy. Everyone, it's not just the upper echelons of the church that need to be able to read the Bible. Yes, everyone needs to be able to read the Bible for themselves. And that is massive, right? So what happens with Protestantism is, in the context that we've already described, the context of university, but let's admit the universities were always for the upper crust of societies and the upper crust of the clergy and so forth. Even lower clergy would not have been university educated. Yeah. Many of them would have been barely literate. But what Protestantism essentially does is that in Protestant lands see an absolute flurry of schools and educational institutions that are educating the populace so that they can read the Bibles for themselves. Yeah. Now, this has a huge, huge effect, right? Because straight away people are grappling with ideas, right? Yeah. And they're starting to think, like, imagine this, right? I'm not just accepting something that my dad told me. Yeah. I'm reading things. I'm reading the writings of Martin Luther in the 16th century, right? Yep. And we're down at the corner pub and we're discussing this together, and and you're entering into this rational process of disputation, and all of that's developing as that's happening. This is developing the Western mind, right? Yeah. And this is what he's saying is that ordinary people develop this ability to reason and debate and not just accept ideas because they were handed down. Now, again, in our context, this is being really undermined because we're now being isolated, socially isolated, and most people get their information from, reels and
we'll come back and talk about that. Let's just
but
we'll get there.
So a lot of this actually is being undermined in our context. But
this is the development, tracing that through. Yeah. So the fundamental thing, the shift that we've seen is moving from that clan-based, kin-based kind of societies. The emphasis now comes on the individual, and we see that in the words, of Paul. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female, you're all one in Christ Jesus. Yeah. So it's kind of demolished, setting the framework there for past all of those clan-based hierarchies that really did naturally see people as lesser. like it was a natural thing you were born into. Naturally, I'm superior to that person. We still see that today. The transition that's happened is now it's about the individual, that all individuals are sacred, can stand before God, accountable to God, have their own relationship to God. And the relationship that you have with God is dependent on you making the choice and you choosing to seek out that relationship with God, and you are accountable to God, not some other organization or whatever. It was a useful diagram I saw that kin-based society, their idea of God was like you've got God at the top and then you draw a line to the clan and then the clan to you as the individual. So your relationship to God was via the clan. But now what we have is there's God at the top. The connection is you to God. And also there's a connection to
and whoever you choose
community.
to
The connection to God isn't through your
and you get to choose your community. And this is the interesting thing about this. And that becomes possible. And we haven't talked about economics yet, but the development of this individual response to God and the development of conscience. So when I have a conscience, I of course project on you what I have, right? There's a sense of trust that you also have a conscience. So what that means is I'm now more likely to trust you. And this is one of the things that that research that he goes through. They measure trust in strangers. Now, our whole society is built on trust in strangers. What is money? Money. Well, I'm not going to answer that question because I'm not an economist, but I'm thinking of Yuval Noah Harari's discussion of money and others that I've read. It's all based on trust. Our whole economic system is based on trust.
Forget about money, as contracts, as constitutions. We place our faith in constitutions and contracts, and that govern not just our clan, but it's like our whole country.
That's right.
And so therefore, we're all collectively in it. Even you just think about it at a country level, we're all collectively in this together, ascribing to the same set of laws and constitutions and governments.
Which creates stability, which means I can also trust in the future somewhat. So essentially, what this allows for is the creation of markets, like large markets.
Right.
When we talk about the markets, economics, that's right. So this is not possible. It was not. So you just see. So the implications of these changes, the ripple effect is enormous, right? I mean, what it does is that it greatly empowers Western societies now. This is where we might well be a little ambivalent about that, because human beings have a habit of taking power and using it in all the wrong ways, right? I mean, Henrik in his book isn't really making any judgments about that. But the fact is, what we see here is we see the revolutionary ripple effect. I mean, it's beyond revolutionary. In fact, it's this world-changing ripple effect of the presence of the Christian church in society and changing marriage norms and inventing the individual, making these things possible, bringing conscience into the lives of people. All of these different aspects are creating the communal brain, the idea of the advancement of knowledge as we have it. It enables all of this.
We haven't said too, which is the establishment of charities, charitable organizations, because all of a sudden we now have a conscience for people who are strangers to us and an obligation to lift those people up and care for people that are
different
related to us. So all of a sudden, the whole idea of even hospitals, it's like that we take that so much for granted. But again, it comes from this whole idea: hospitals, charities, caring for one another.
The parable of the Good Samaritan is so revolutionary. It's almost, for us, it just feels self-evident, right? But that's because we think the way that we think, right? Any person today could read, in our society, would read the parable of the Good Samaritan and go, yeah, of course, of course he did the right thing. That's what you're supposed to do, isn't it? But no one at the time thought that. Like, no one thought that. And it's not even just because he was a Samaritan who were particularly hated. I mean, he uses the most polarized example. But the idea of essentially, risking, the Levite and the priest pass by, and they're risking ceremonial uncleanliness for the sake of some stranger. Yeah. Like, I have no obligation towards this stranger. Whereas Jesus is saying, no, you do now. Yeah. You do now. And that obligation to the stranger, that creates a cohesive base for the society that we now know. That creates the basis for even the veneer of international order that we've enjoyed probably up to the present time, as everyone's saying. Yeah. It's what's made everything possible.
So one of the things that these authors have pointed out too, and again, not coming from a Christian bias, but saying how much we think in our modern society these things are self-evident, but actually we're immersed inside a cultural psychology.
Yeah.
It's turned into a system of organizing ourselves that has grown out of the Christian worldview. It's the Christian idea that's kind of enabled that to happen. And we live in it and we assume that that's just how we are naturally. Like when you listen to a lot of, atheists about it, they like to present this narrative that we are what we are today because we managed to shake off the shackles of religion. We're able to think for ourselves and reason for ourselves, and we move beyond. We didn't need all of that religious idea. And it's the common narrative. And therefore, Christianity is therefore like a kind of trying to regress us back into those bad ideas. In fact, these authors are making the case that these ideas themselves grew because of the Christian ideas, the Christian worldview that enabled these things to happen.
So one of the things, Connell, I think at this point that it would be good to just lean in on a little is the fact that, yes, there's a lot of good in this, but remember, and this is a key idea, this idea that human beings are experts at taking good things and wrecking them, right? Taking them in the wrong direction. Yep. Whereas what we're describing here is a process that has greatly empowered Western societies. But that has also led to problems. So we're not saying, I think this is really important today, we're not saying that we're better than everyone else. Because in our state of empowerment, we've also acquired a host of problems as well, like particularly because our society is so industrialized and so we're much more alienated from our environment. Individuality becomes individualism, and so we lose a sense of collective, a sense of family. So there are lots of levels of alienation here because, again, if we're receiving these ideas and we're empowered through our education and through acquiring these capacities of rational thought, abstract thinking, well, we know, Connell, that can all go in really bad directions, right?
Yeah.
We can end up being what Charles Taylor refers to as buff, and in fact, his analysis of the average Western mind. I mean, and he really problematizes this I'm talking about a Canadian philosopher, Charles Taylor, in a very famous book called A Secular Age. Essentially, he shows how, weird individuals have this really problematic buffered relationship with reality because we've taken our ability for abstract thinking and we've made the world into an object. In a sense, this empowerment has accelerated our God complex. This is the way that he doesn't use these words, but a God complex in which we essentially set ourselves off from the world. We tend to no longer be embedded in our environment. We become disoriented. We become alienated. We see the world and even other people. We have a tendency to see the world and other people as objects. So all of that. Now, we've talked about some of that stuff before.
But you don't have to think too hard to see that. Well, even when you talk about emphasizing the importance and value of the individual, that's good. But then as we become less of a communal society and more of an individualist society, that doesn't sound like a good thing.
No,
even though there's all these great things that have come out of it.
Yeah, well, we're a very powerful society, but we've lost some really key elements of our humanity. And this is where we can learn, and we must learn from, traditional societies. So this is not advocating a sort of superiority complex here, because like human beings are human beings, right? And whether you're in a patrimonial society, kin-based society, or whether you are a secular person in a very individualistic society, we stand before God with equal problems. Now, and I think this is where we want to go with this, the imperative to realize how powerful our worldview actually is, but we need to make sure that we take it to its logical conclusion, right? This is where we need to keep ensuring that there is a real presence of the light of God through his church and of the gospel in society, because we want to see people taking these ideas to their logical end, not just benefiting from these levels of empowerment and then running off playing God, but I think taking it to its logical conclusion.
This thing of individuality that we've talked about as being a good thing, because it broke down that clan-based society. So it's been a good thing, and in many ways. And at the heart of the gospel is that emphasis on individual accountability and our own sacred value and worth, and so on. So that's been a good thing, and we've seen it flourish in our societies. But this is where I think we've got a problem, and I think this is why it's important for people to think about. One of it is understanding how we got to be where we are. Like, you don't have to listen to the sort of atheist narrative of that we've thrown all of that stuff off and it's all this gobbledygook now. You can actually be confident that the very ideas is where their ideas have come from, and they think it's self-evident. It's actually this Christian.
It's not. I mean, the American Constitution, says we hold that, talks about the equality of all people, except, of course, that was a slave society. But anyway, in the Constitution, it says we hold these things to be self-evident. Well, we now realize no, they were never self-evident. And I think even a lot of the sort of atheists from the 2000s now are actually, because there's been so much literature since then on the intellectual, including this book, intellectual and now psychological roots of our whole way of thinking. I think people are starting to realize, and of course, Tom Holland's book, is another one, Dominion, Rodney Stark's book, The Triumph of Christianity. There's all of this literature basically showing that our whole way of life is built on a Christian worldview. This is also Alistair McIntyre, a very prominent philosopher, who argued this with respect to ethics. He said our whole ethical systems previously built on this sort of framework, and we've deconstructed the framework, and we have fragments of this ethics. But without the framework, that's not going to hold. We're going to go in all sorts of weird and wonderful directions.
So what have we done? We
basically
built the kingdom without the king.
That's a good one.
It's exactly. It. And now this whole emphasis on the individual is like, well... Yeah,
we've used biblical materials to build a sort of kingdom
and then pushed it, and then kicked it out the door. And now all of a sudden...
Sounds biblical, doesn't it?
I've got a God complex where, hey, as an individual, I will decide what's right, and my opinions...
sovereign.
That's right. Everything's sovereign with me. So then what you see is the breakdown of where the individual now starts to really run off the rails. So first of all, I think as Christians, we need to be aware of the history, the fact that we're actually standing on good soil here. But also, I kind of was thinking about it, and I was thinking, what I kind of see at the moment is like a fork in the road, where it's got us to this point. And this whole idea of this individual responsibility and emphasis on the individual is forking two ways in the road. And one of them is you becoming sovereign, godlike in your own individual nature, and breaking off from community. Because I think the biblical model is understanding the value of the individual, but not in isolation.
Embedded in a new family.
New family, a new community, and not even...
Which is the church.
Not even just the church, though. We'd care for those who are outside the church as well. So that was the model. But if we go too much down the individual path and start severing our relationships, then we end up becoming this hyper-individual,
that's right. And
self-obsessed society.
Yeah. And in a sense that the way to exercise, because remember, as I said before, there's a sense in which you see God fragmenting the wrong kind of communalism to create the right kind of communalism. And essentially what the church is meant to be is the right kind of community, the right kind of collectivity, this sense of the individual as a part of the body, Paul's idea of the body, absolutely emphasizing individuality, but emphasizing community as the place where the individual belongs. And I think that's a key corrective to this.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to something you said, because I want to just draw a line into something you said, because there has been a way of thinking out there that there was these dark ages when the church was in charge, and then the Enlightenment came along and we were saved from all the superstition of Christianity, and that popularized the terminology of the so-called dark ages. Now, it's, I think, well recognized now that the Dark Ages thing was a myth, really. That was a bit of a self-congratulatory perspective of the Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Gibbon and others in the 1700s, who saw what they were doing as a sort of enlightenment. We're breaking free of religious faith. But the rationalist Enlightenment project, while first of all, they didn't acknowledge where their roots were in actually a Christian worldview. And it's, of course, in the 1700s that you have this idea that of all people being equal being self-evident. It's just, it's crazy. Basically they were taking a Christian worldview and just trying to get rid of the foundations of it. So that's, I think, well recognized now. So I think, but it's still out there a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's still out there a bit. It had a sort of a last gasp, I think, in the new atheists in the 2000s who have now, been discredited, but
you do see it's
still out there.
You do see it turning a bit more now. I think there's a different tone, I think, out there that I'm certainly hearing. It's not so black and white.
I think the right response to these ideas is important, because this is not an argument to say we need to impose a cultural Christianity on our culture, right? The change happens by the seed being planted, and the seed grows and becomes a tree. Like, it's this just trying to affect something overnight through the imposition of some kind of cultural revolution. This is not how this happens. If anything, what we've shown today is that the seed of the gospel has changed society, but it's changed over hundreds of years. And we need to have confidence in that seed. And again, not try and impose it. We are essentially, I think, encouraged here to continue to play our small part in planting the seeds that we need to plant, seeds of the gospel, because the ripple effect of the gospel in society, it actually has an effect way outside of those that will become Christians. It affects everyone, and it brings something to the whole of society, as opposed to us just trying to impose something on our society. By bringing these things, growing these things up within our society, it's an argument for the right kind of social and political influence.
Yeah. The thing is there too is our role to model that, to be a counterforce. It's not imposing, it's modeling. You're just a little seed that gradually...
There's a significance in every seed.
But we think that we've got to do big things, and it's just modeling it to other people can be enough to just slowly turn the tide. I think we've got more threats today than we've ever seen in the history of the world. We've got people now who are focused on the individual, but now through technology and AI and the development of all sorts of forces in society now that are actually actively trying to break the relationship, the human relationship bonds, which is just exposing society even more to the problems of this hyper individual focus. So I think just as Christians, we need to be aware of it, and also aware of how it impacts us, because we're actually part of that society, and we need to fight against those inclinations ourselves.
That's a good point, because the communal brain thing that Henrik talks about, of course, he was talking about, university systems and concerted efforts across, cooperating in the pursuit of knowledge. I mean, the communal brain went to another level with, of course, the internet. And that seemed really good, but now we're realizing how actually problematic this is as we move into what they call a post-truth age. Goodness. And I think, it totally highlights the fact that what is needed is people who model something different, who model a different way of thinking, who step by step and seed by seed bring the light of the gospel into our society, in the understanding that we're playing the long game here. Our influence is going to be over hundreds of years, and we need to remember that God is the Lord over history, right? And we see this. You see the influence of the Christian movement in history as you look back, even through all of the terrible things, all of the shortfalls, and even the evils of the church. So much good has come through. Yes, human beings have then instrumentalized that good for evil purposes. We need to show what it means to steward the goodness of God for the right reasons.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Thrive Perspectives. Our hope is that these discussions will challenge you to look at life from a new perspective. You'll find all our resources at the Thrive Today website, thrivetoday.tv. If there's a topic that you'd like us to discuss, please email us. Our email is contact@thrivetoday.tv. Until next time, our prayer is that you will thrive.